Get ready for it because there is going to be absolutely no shortage of rumors or theories and all that different stuff, everything in between, as it pertains to the Dallas Mavericks and their upcoming plans for this team, because they have a ton of different paths. They could stay the course, which wouldn't be what fans would most likely would want. They could try to retool. They could pivot to a full rebuild, even though they don't control a lot of their assets. They do this offseason with the draft upcoming. They could potentially get a high draft pick, maybe trade for some more first round picks by offsetting or offloading, some of their guys in the current iteration of the roster. That may even include some young guys that struggle to stay healthy. You know who I'm talking about. That being said, there's just a lot here. But one of the main things and one of the first things they need to figure out is the direction with Anthony Davis, right? And there was a report that they are actually going to be talking with Anthony Davis and his camp, so Clutch Sports, etc., and figuring out what the best decision and what the best course of action is as it pertains to him. So we're going to talk about that and some interesting stuff that's come out today as it relates to Anthony Davis. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let's get this video to a like goal of 300 likes. If you're new here, subscribe to the Basketball Bulletin for more information like this. Trevor Lane and I will do our best to keep you guys informed. A lot of times it'll be both of us, but sometimes if one of us is busy or out or whatever, it'll be just one of us, but we'll try our best anyway. So over on NBA Central earlier today, SI Chris Mannix, so from Sports Illustrated. As for what's next, I'm told that Mark Cuban, the Mavs minority owner who was exiled from basketball operations by Harrison, is back at the table. I'm also told that the radical roster changes have already been discussed by Dallas's new brain trust. Big changes could be coming to the Big D. So this is not completely in line with this. Like, it obviously is like a precursor, but it is interesting how Dumont is kind of doing this thing where he gets rid of Nico and he's starting to try to, and there was a report of like Dirk being back in the mix and all this stuff, right? Trying to bring back some stuff. I'm sure it's probably also just to try to win back the fan support, all this stuff, right? But bringing back Cuban, bringing back Dirk and some other people as well to the organization that are obviously very big names in Dallas, right? So very interesting overall. But again, this has been something that they're already discussing. Now, moving on from that, earlier today, and this isn't like he's obviously a former all-star player, but he's not, like a reporter or anything like that. But he's John Wall said, you've been hearing he wants to go back to Chicago and see what's going on. We got the eyes emoji there. So what does the trade for Anthony Davis look like? What is the general fan sentiment I've seen over on Reddit, a little bit on Twitter? We're going to talk about that from here. But, in terms of this, there's always been the potential, the idea, the rumbling for Anthony Davis, even going back to his LA days. I didn't really follow him a ton back in New Orleans, maybe even back then, but going back then that he could potentially want to play at some point for Chicago, being that he's from Chicago, and that could be something that he would want to do, right? And right now, I think is an interesting time because he is somebody that's exiting his prime, I would say. I think that's fair to say. Certainly with the injuries as well. That doesn't mean he can't still be an effective player for a number of years, but I think he is on his way out of his prime over the course of the next couple of seasons, if he isn't already, right? Anyway, somebody that's at that point, and he could be a player that could be exactly what Chicago needs. However, at the same time, could be a player that Chicago doesn't really need at all, right? So what do I mean by that? Chicago is a young, feisty team. So on the surface, they could really use a guy like an Anthony Davis. They could really use some rim protection. They could really use an offensive force, a defensive force like him. But at the same time, they really don't want to have somebody on that roster making max salary that is not going to be available for them. That is one of the big things. Also, is AD on their timeline? Not really, right? That doesn't mean they can't pivot into being something good, but he's not really on their timeline. Also, in the Eastern Conference, I would expect for that team to be maybe a second round out, right? That's cool. I mean, that's better than they've been. So if that's just what you're trying to be in Chicago, then fine, right? There's no knock on that, right? But I don't think that AD is not going to be the one. I think it's pretty fair to say I don't think AD would be the one to lead this team to a championship. You would obviously hope for some more upward trajectory for the guys to continue on this team anyway, to continue that upward trajectory like a Josh Giddey. Obviously, there's some questions around Kobe White. You've got some other young guys like Buzelis, etc. They would need to keep on aging into that, but at the same time, AD would be on a decline. And there's also questions about Anthony Davis, not just because of the health, etc., but because he would be somebody that would be also looking for another extension And so you look at it, you project it out. We were talking about this yesterday, Trevor and I on the channel. I'm not sure AD is going to be worth 70 plus million. In fact, I feel pretty confident he won't be in 5, 6 years. What is that number? It's like 70, 80 million. I don't think he's going to be worth that. Right. So maybe he would take the Kevin Durant route. He's obviously much younger than KD, like a handful of years anyway. But maybe he would take that route and decide maybe I can take a little bit off of this to just help the team for the long term. I'm not so sure what AD's plans would be in that regard, but this is certainly something that I think is on the table. Now, looking at the Chicago side of things, like I said, he again could be a player that they could use. He also could be a player that they don't need. However, I will say, with that being said, if they're able to offset a salary like a Vucevic, somebody that they also don't need, where there's not really a downside to it, like if they don't have to give up too much of their young assets or anything like that, then that's something that or like first round picks, etc. I think that would be something that they should actually really strongly consider, right? That wouldn't be because there's not really a ton of downside at that point. The only downside would be, again, the books situation. But if you look at their books, they don't have a guy taking up that max salary space. They are in a position right now where they could eat that. They could easily eat that. They could eat a couple of those. they don't really have that. And that's actually a good thing for the Bulls, right? But if they wanted to do that, that's absolutely something they could do. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment here after a quick word.
I'd like to thank Mint Mobile for sponsoring this video. They have an incredible holiday deal right now. $15 a month on their 3, 6, and 12-month plans, the lowest price of the year. Plus, Mint offers coverage on the nation's largest 5G network. Mint provides 5G coverage to 98% of Americans and 4G LTE coverage to 99% of Americans. And Mint lets you choose the data amount that's right for you so you don't overpay for one size fits all. Select from 5, 15, or 20 gigabytes or go with the unlimited data each month. Plus, switching is easy. You can sign up and activate in minutes with eSIM from the comfort of your home. 96% of users rate themselves as highly satisfied with Mint's customer care. And all their plans come with an unconditional 7-day money-back guarantee. So for a limited time this holiday season, you can get 50% off an unlimited premium wireless plan from Mint. Lock in Mint's lowest price of the year and pay just $15 a month for a 3, 6, or 12-month plan.
So if you're Dallas, I think if you're going to pull off this trade, you would need to, obviously, firstly, you would need to get matching salaries, and taking back a guy like Vucevic wouldn't be the worst thing because he comes off the books. If you wanted to do that, like he's an expiring, that would work out pretty well for you actually. But you need to also get a young player, a guard, ideally. Chicago has a couple of them. Kobe, they've got Desumnu. They could throw in one of those guys. And obviously Chicago really makes use of these players a ton, but they've also already committed to Giddey. Do you want to commit to those guys as well? Maybe one of them, both of them. I think for the long term, that's a lot of money to have tied up into basically one position, maybe two positions, depending on how you slot the guys as you go. But that's certainly a good problem to have. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Chicago needs to get rid of these guys ASAP or anything like that. I just wonder about, that 3-man grouping, all these guys potentially making a cumulative 65, 70 million. That's kind of a lot of money just in the guard position. But again, you do need quality guard depth in the NBA, but you also need that quality handling and shooting and defense just around the roster in today's NBA anyway. You need to have a lot of guys that can dribble, shoot, pass, and defend ideally, right? That's what everyone is trying to build out. So anyway, moving on from that, if you're the Bulls, you probably don't want to give up one of those guys unless you find out that you're far apart in a potential extension with somebody in terms of like salary. Maybe at that point you could get rid of one of those players and have them as part of that. And if you do that, maybe you could talk Dallas down from a first round pick or something like that, right? But I think Vucevic would have to be one of the main linchpins of this, and I think that could be beneficial to both sides for different reasons. Now, I was looking at the Bulls Reddit, and they had an idea for the trade. Let's say the Bulls are sitting around the 4th or 5th seed at the trade deadline. What would you guys be willing to give up for AD? So firstly, the Bulls are, 6-5 right now? Something like that. They started off amazingly. They've lost their last 4 or 5 games or so. They're 5-5 in their last 10. So anyway, they have been without Giddey for a bit. They've been without White this time for a while now. So there's still a chance that they have upward trajectory. Speaking of Giddey, I think he's proven to be every bit worth that salary. The shooting seems to have been real, which is amazing. It's just like Gordon, where it's like, is this real? But Gordon's obviously much later in his career for the Nuggets, right? Much later in his career, but all of a sudden it's real. So okay, cool. Anyway, so they I think have a lot of opportunity here. Buzelis has been great. There's been other guys, obviously can't go down the entire list, but I do think they have a good chance to wind up in that range. Ironically, if they can keep this going, and if they can stay relatively healthy, I think they could end up in that range easily, right? For me, I'd probably offer Vooch Williams, who is somebody that hasn't exactly panned out for them. I have to check on his current production this year, but up until this year, he hasn't exactly panned out for them. Javon Carter, the Portland pick, and maybe a couple of seconds. Okay, that could be a decent offering, right? It just depends on what Dallas wants. If you're Dallas, do you want Williams back? You kind of already have a logjam there. I'm not exactly sure on that piece of it. Also, another underrated piece of this also is that AD, ideally, he would play the center for Dallas. Or Dallas, excuse me. Well, yeah, for Dallas too, but for Chicago. And again, he's really been against doing that for a number of years. But especially now, older, slower, bigger, the biggest of his entire career, probably the biggest of his life, probably for the best. But anyway, let's see some of the replies here. He'll get hurt within a week after the trade. Nico, is that you? Damn. It's funny over the season, NBA trades. I think the Bulls are going to give up Kobe for him. Guy played 40 games a year and cost $60 million. This is where the unfortunate sentiment is with AD. He really hit a stretch where he played 75 games a season, played the postseason before, postseason after, played like 100 games or something like that out of play like 90% of the games he was available playing, and then all of a sudden, boom, just gets hurt, and then nobody cares anymore. Like seriously, he went through a really healthy stretch. Even for the first part of the LA season, he was pretty healthy for them too. And then he gets traded, and then he gets hurt, and then he's out. And then he's in Dallas again, he's out. So it is what it is. Can't defend that. Anyway, so he can play 12 games for us. Nothing at all. I wouldn't want him on my team because he can't stay healthy. If we go all in for someone, I want Lowry back. Oh man, or Lowry, excuse me. That would be pretty great. He really left, went there. Cleveland started to develop really good, and now he's insane. I'm more interested in Gafford or Lively. Street clothes can stay far from us. Damn, that's brutal. Those are also injury-prone players. Yes, indeed they are. I talked about that very briefly in the beginning. Lively certainly is. Gafford a little bit less. Anyway, take Vooch out, and we're talking. Okay, someone wants to keep Vucevic. Okay, that's fair. Never cook again. Any draft compensation for street clothes is a felony. And I want to kind of end on that. Man, this is also extremely brutal. This is extremely brutal. The way he is talked about, extremely brutal. Every single one of these is street clothes, can't stay healthy, blah, blah, blah. That's brutal. That tells you where the value for AD is. It just in general. I think obviously nuance matters, context matters. An organization looking at Anthony Davis can see what he is. And you would have an elite finisher around the basket, an elite lob threat, one of the best ever, in my opinion. An elite defensive player, an elite rim protector, just in general. Somebody that, at his best, is able to do a litany of different things on the court. But at the same time, the reality is he's into his 30s, and he's an old. What is he? 31? He's an old 31, 32. He's an old 32. Like he is. He's slower. I just can't. It's been burned into my mind when the Lakers would play the Nuggets in those playoff series, how every single time down, Anthony Davis was the last player up the court. And you have Jokic leading the break. And by the time AD gets to like half court, they're already on the way back because they already went and scored. Like, he's slow. It is what it is. And some of that was because he'd fall and it would take him out of bounds. There's context again. So anyway, you could see that. And so if you're a team trading for AD, and again, the injury concern, I meant to mention that. I don't know that you can give up the farm. You can't give up the farm. The crazy thing is, if you go back to Anthony Davis during that stretch I was talking about where he was really healthy, even that stretch at the beginning of last season, prior to the injuries, prior to the trade, he was talked about as a top 10 guy. Hell, the last game AD played for the Lakers was a 40-20 game. And in the span of a year, 9 months, This is like, we talk about him like he's not even a top 50 guy, right? That's what's insane here. And so if you're Dallas, ultimately, it may be best to wait because he's going to recoup some value, but I think he needs to be out there and be healthy for a prolonged period of time to show what he can be, right? This is honestly brutal. It is brutal as a fan of his. It is brutal to see the way he is talked about and thought about. So, long story short, I don't know that they could offer much in a trade if you're Chicago. And again, I don't know if Chicago even should pull the trigger. I thought personally you should do it if it meant that there wasn't a large reason not to. And in the worst case, you could decline his extension and you would have him off the books in a couple years. Do that too, right? So anyway, we're going to go ahead and conclude there, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. And let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.